Hello, and welcome to our PTASP webinar on Talking SMS and PTASP. I'm Stuart Mader, and I lead the FTA's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Technical Assistance Center within the Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. We're also joined today by Andrew Lofton, a contractor supporting FTA's PTASP Technical Assistance Center. If you're a regular participant of our webinars, you'll notice that today's webinar is a little bit different than our usual offering. Today, we're opening the mailbag and answering your questions. And we're excited to try out this new format, which provides a great opportunity to answer questions, to share answers to some of your questions. We want to take a minute to thank everybody who's provided feedback on our previous webinars. Your survey responses help us develop and deliver resources and tools that are most relevant to your needs. And based on your feedback, we're continuing to evolve the webinar format, including today's new mailbag format. We encourage you to visit the FTA PTASP TAC Resource Library at transit.dot.gov/PTASP-TAC to learn more. And at the conclusion of this webinar, you'll have another opportunity to share your feedback in a brief survey, and we look forward to your feedback on these changes. And now I'll hand it over to Andy to review the agenda and introduce our topics. Andy?
Thanks, Stuart, and welcome to all of our participants today. In our webinar session today, we were going to be reviewing questions that have been received by the PTASP Technical Assistance Center related to the PTASP regulation. And we're going to provide answers to those questions today. To organize today's session, we have put all of your questions into two main categories. First category is safety management systems, or SMS. And in that category, we're going to deal with questions related to SMS processes and SMS implementation. Our second category is agency safety plans. In this category, we're going to cover all of those questions that deal with requirements related to a transit agency's ASP. Now, with that, let's get started with our safety management system category. And Stuart, our first question is, what are some ways that agencies can monitor their operations and maintenance procedures?
That's a great question, Andy. The PTASP regulation requires each applicable transit agency to, quote, monitor its system for compliance with and sufficiency of the agency's procedures for operations and maintenance. And that's in 49 CFR section 673.27B1. FTA has published a number of resources in the PTASP TAC resource library that address this requirement, including articles on SMS techniques for monitoring operations and maintenance, procedures, and monitoring compliance with operations and maintenance procedures. We also have a guide on monitoring operations and maintenance procedures and a webinar on SMS techniques that your agency can use for ongoing monitoring of your operations and maintenance procedures. All of those are available in the PTASP TAC resource library at transit.dot.gov/PTASP-TAC. And Andy, our next question is, our agency is past the ASP development phase. So what information does FTA have on implementing SMS, the ongoing implementation of SMS procedures within our agency environment?
Thanks, Stuart. That's a great question. The PTASP Technical Assistance Center hosted virtual bus agency safety plan implementation workshops. And the purpose of those virtual workshops was to help participants plan for and practice implementing elements of their agency safety plans. In the workshops, participants collaborated and explored ways to implement and to assess safety management system processes as described in their agency's ASPs. FTA has a recording of the workshop, as well as the participant guide that was used during the virtual workshop. All of those materials are available for download on the PTASP TAC website. Now, in addition to that, we would also recommend the TAC's webinars on the following topics. Number one, on transitioning to agency safety plan implementation. Also a webinar on implementing SMS authorities, accountabilities, and responsibilities. Also a PTASP TAC webinar on implementing safety risk assessment approaches. And also a PTASP TAC webinar on addressing operator assault through your agency's SMS. And Stuart, our next question is, we know some agencies offer opportunities for workers to report safety concerns to their agency employee safety reporting program, or ESRP, and to do this anonymously. What are some ways that agencies can implement anonymous reporting?
That's a great question. Employee safety reporting programs, or ESRP, are a really important component of SMS. And anonymous reporting can take several forms at a transit agency. Anonymity can be offered by either withholding reporter information from reports or by using mechanisms that don't collect identifiable information in the first place. Let me give you a couple of examples. So first, on withholding reporter information. One way that can happen is reporters could verbally report their safety concerns to designated agency personnel, for instance, their supervisors or safety department staff, and then request that the personnel keeps their report anonymous. And in that case, for instance, safety department staff, they would take that report from the worker, but then from that point forward, the safety department personnel would carry that report forward, and there'd be no connection to the original reporter. Another way is that workers could email safety concerns to a designated either agency personnel or an ESRP-specific email inbox and make a request in that email that the personnel keep their report anonymous. The other form is to use mechanisms that don't collect identifiable information. A couple of ways that agencies could do this. For example, workers could verbally report safety concerns to a voicemail box that doesn't capture telephone numbers and reminds workers when they leave their recording not to include their name or contact information. Another way is that workers could handwrite or type their safety concerns using an agency form and then place them in an unmonitored collection box. And for example, an agency could place that collection box in a location that is not monitored by closed circuit CCTV monitoring cameras, and then inform employees that the box is in a location that's unmonitored so that they can feel comfortable making a report and knowing that their contact information, their person identifiable information is not associated with that report. And Andy, our next question is, what are common criteria for severity and likelihood?
Thank you, Stuart. That is a great question. Under the PTASP regulation, transit agencies can identify their own criteria and definitions related to severity and likelihood when performing safety risk assessments. Now, typically, agencies establish categories for likelihood to measure how often a potential consequence could occur. And typical categories include things like frequent, probable, occasional, remote, improbable, and really just express the range of likelihood between frequent and less frequent. And when defining the criteria so that agencies know which likelihood category to place a potential consequence, often agencies use data like time. So how often something may occur on a calendar basis, maybe monthly, daily, hourly, as a basis to classify into a likelihood category. Agencies may also use other time-based approaches like work hours or operational hours to classify likelihood. Now, severity, on the other hand, is measuring how bad a potential consequence could be for the agency. And similarly, agencies typically establish categories that express a range of severity, from the most severe to the least severe. And when determining the criteria for where to place that potential consequence in a severity category, agencies pull from really a wide range of data, typically. It could include things like a fatality, or the number of fatalities that could occur in this potential consequence. Could include things like injuries. Right, those are some of the more common ones we think when classifying how bad something could be, but also property damage. Agencies sometimes use a range of dollar values, or even categories like full or partial destruction of a infrastructure or of a vehicle. Agencies may use aspects of illness, things like partial disability, hospitalization, lost work days as a way to determine severity. We've also seen agencies leverage aspects of service loss to define criteria for severity. Things like the potential consequence could result in a system shutdown or a partial shutdown, or could limit service significantly. We've also seen agencies incorporate elements of environmental damages into their severity determinations. For example, the extent of the damage could be things like, is it reversible? Is it reversible with mitigation? Is it irreversible? So really, there's a wide range of data and approaches that agencies can define when establishing their categories for severity and likelihood. Now, on this topic, FTA has put together a number of resources, focusing on the safety risk assessment process. These resources include a sample safety risk assessment matrix. And this resource goes into further depth on categories that agencies can use when making likelihood and severity determinations as part of their safety risk assessments. It's a great question. And Stuart, our next question is, does the bipartisan infrastructure law require my agency safety plan to follow guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the state health authority on strategies for addressing infectious diseases?
So Andy, the answer is no. And if you're scratching your head when I say no, the reason I say no is because in the question, the way it was phrased, it's does your ASP need to follow guidance from both the CDC and a state health authority? And the reason why I said no is in the bipartisan infrastructure law, it specifies that your transit agency must follow guidance from either the CDC or a state health authority. So you look for guidance from one or the other, but not both. And our next question, Andy, is how should our agency integrate the new risk reduction program into our ASP?
Thank you, Stuart. That's a great question. Transit agencies have flexibility on how they are going to integrate risk reduction programs into their agency safety plans and how they're going to implement those risk reduction programs to best suit their agency's own unique circumstances and to obviously to meet the statutory requirements. Now, the risk reduction program, fundamentally, it needs to comply with federal transit law at 49 USC section 5329 D1I. And at this section, there's a requirement that section 5307 recipients serving a large urbanized area, that means an urbanized area with at least 200,000 in population, that those agencies establish a risk reduction program for transit operations to improve safety by reducing the number and rates of accidents, injuries, and assaults on transit workers based on data that they submit to the National Transit Database. Now, performance targets for a risk reduction program are not required to be set until FTA has updated the National Public Transportation Safety Plan to include these new performance measures. Now, that said, nothing precludes a transit agency from implementing a risk reduction program in advance and then potentially updating it once those performance measures have been updated, defined, and published in the National Public Transportation Safety Plan. And Stuart, that brings us to our next question, which is, what is the role of the Safety Committee?
The bipartisan infrastructure law, Andy, requires the Safety Committee to approve an agency's updated agency safety plan and then any updates to the ASP. This approval needs to occur before the agency's board of directors approves the ASP or update. The Safety Committee is also responsible for several other safety-related activities. At a minimum, these include identifying and recommending risk-based mitigations or strategies that are necessary to reduce the likelihood and severity of consequences that are identified through the agency's safety risk assessment. Second, the Safety Committee is responsible for identifying mitigations or strategies that may be ineffective, inappropriate, or not working as intended. And third is to identify safety deficiencies for the purposes of continuous improvement. Andy, our next question is about state safety oversight authorities. And the question is, can the SSOA set requirements for a rail transit agency's SMS processes? For example, the PTASP regulation doesn't require agencies to use a safety risk register, but could an SSOA require a rail transit agency to use a safety risk register?
Great question, Stuart. And the answer is yes, provided that the state safety oversight agency's requirements do not contradict with FTA's regulatory requirements. So that means that SSOAs may establish requirements beyond FTA's requirements for the rail transit agencies under their jurisdiction. And that brings us to the end of our first category, safety management systems. And now we'll be transitioning to our second category of question today, which is agency safety plans.
All right, Andy, our first question in the agency safety plans topic is, how do I determine whether my agency is required to meet the requirements for a large UZA?
Thank you, Stuart. And that's a great question. The new bipartisan infrastructure law requirements at 49 USC section 5329D apply to recipients of section 5307 funding that serve an urbanized area with a population of 200,000 or more. We refer to this as a large urbanized area. Now, how will you know whether or not you serve a large urbanized area? Probably most of you already know whether or not the UZA or UZAs you serve are large in size, over 200,000. But it's good to double check that, since the census data can change. Now, transit agencies can confirm the size of the urbanized areas that they serve based on data that the transit agency reports to the National Transit Database. The Federal Transit Administration publishes this reported data publicly on the NTD data website. In the 2021 annual database federal funding allocation file presents the latest available UZA service data. And that file will show you the urbanized area or multiple urbanized areas that are served by your transit agency. And it will also tell you the population of those urbanized areas. And Stuart, our next question is, does our full board of directors or equivalent authority have to approve our ASP, or can a subcommittee approve the ASP?
The PTASP regulation, the specific location in there is 49 CFR 673, section 11A1. It requires the ASP and subsequent updates to the ASP to be signed by the accountable executive and approved by the agency's board of directors or an equivalent authority. Therefore, when an agency updates its ASP, it needs to seek approval from the full board of directors after the ASP is approved by the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee for agencies that serve a large urbanized area, and then signed by the accountable executive. Now, a board subcommittee could support the board of directors approval process. For instance, the subcommittee could review the ASP and provide a recommendation to the full board to approve, but the board of directors itself needs to approve the ASP. So Andy, our next question is FTA providing voluntary ASP reviews?
Yes, Stuart. The PTASP TAC is still providing voluntary agency safety plan reviews, and is providing this service for agencies at all stages of development. So that's whether or not you're updating an existing agency safety plan, and you're updating it perhaps to comply with new PTASP requirements, or if you're a newly applicable agency and you're developing your first agency safety plan. In either case, we encourage you to reach out to our team at the PTASP TAC. And you can reach out to us by email at ptasp-tac@dot.gov and email your draft agency safety plan. The team will review your ASP against checklists to provide you feedback from the review team that you can incorporate into your development process and plan update process. So upon completion, the team will provide you with a complete set of feedback for your review. And Stuart, our next question is, can we reference other documents in the ASP instead of including them directly in the document? And if so, do we have to update the ASP if we update these referenced documents?
So the simple answer is yes. Agencies may incorporate documents by reference in their ASP. FTA doesn't require that agencies update their ASP when they update reference documents, but you might choose to update your ASP to reflect an update in your reference documents during your annual ASP review and update process. And Andy, our next question is, how will FTA monitor compliance with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law PTASP requirements?
Thank you, Stuart. Applicable recipients are already required to certify that they've established an agency safety plan that meets the requirements of 49 USC section 5329 D1 and 49 CFR part 673. And they're already required to do this as part of the annual certifications and assurances for FTA grants and cooperative agreements. This occurs, and FTA monitors these certifications through FTA's Transit Award Management System, or TRAMS. Now, beginning in calendar year 2023, FTA will integrate these new requirements at 49 USC section 5329D into FTA's triennial and state management review processes, so that those requirements will be part of those triennial and state management reviews moving forward. And Stuart, our next question is, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law requires transit agencies serving a small urbanized area to develop their agency safety plans in cooperation with frontline employees. FTA requires agencies to meet this requirement by December 31st, 2022. Now, here's the question. If we have already reviewed and updated our ASP this year without the cooperation from frontline employee representatives, does FTA expect us to review and update our ASP again before this compliance date of December 31st, 2022?
Andy, the one-word answer is yes. If your existing ASP was not developed in cooperation with your frontline employee representatives, then an agency serving a small urbanized area needs to update their ASP in cooperation with their frontline employee representatives and needs to do so by the compliance date established in FTA's February 17th Dear Colleague letter, and that date is December 31st, 2022, and that needs to occur regardless of when the last update occurred. And our next question, our agency has more than one labor union, and our frontline workforce includes both union and non-unionized employees. How do we form our safety committee?
Great question. Thank you. So if an agency has more than one union representing frontline transit workers, or a mix of union and non-union frontline transit workers, the labor organization that represents the greatest number of frontline workers employed by the agency or a contractor of the agency, then that labor organization selects the frontline employee representatives to serve on the safety committee. And this labor organization may select frontline employee representatives for the safety committee from throughout the organization, not just from within their own membership. And Stuart, our next question is, how do the bipartisan infrastructure law changes affect the role of state safety oversight agencies in reviewing and approving rail transit agency ASPs?
Great question, Andy. So SSOAs are responsible for reviewing and approving rail transit agency ASPs and ASP updates, and that needs to occur after the agency's board of directors has approved the ASP or ASP update. The bipartisan infrastructure law requirements don't change this responsibility for SSOAs.
Where can I find more information on the bipartisan infrastructure law and the changes to the PTASP requirements at 49 USC section 5329D?
That's an excellent question, Andy. You can find more information. The primary place we direct you to go is transit.dot.gov/BIL. Again, that's transit.dot.gov/BIL. And that landing page contains all of FTA's information on the bipartisan infrastructure law, including the safety-specific changes to the PTASP program. And on there, you'll find a link to FAQs for the new bipartisan infrastructure law PTASP requirements. You'll find a link to a webinar that we conducted earlier this year on the changes to PTASP. So we also encourage you to contact FTA-IIJA@dot.gov. Again, that's FTA-IIJA@dot.gov with your further questions about the bipartisan infrastructure law requirements. You can also get in touch with the PTASP TAC at ptasp-tac@dot.gov, or by phone, you can call the help desk at 1-877-827-7243. Again, that's 1-877-827-7243. And in particular, I want to quickly mention two resources that may be helpful to agencies as you update your ASP. One is the TAC is available to provide reviews of ASPs, voluntary reviews of ASPs. So if you submit your draft ASP to the TAC will review it against checklists that we have for bus transit agencies and rail transit agencies and SSOAs, and give you feedback on your ASP ahead of the compliance dates for incorporating the bipartisan infrastructure law requirements. Also, those checklists that the TAC is using are available to you. You can access those from the PTASP TAC resource library. Again, there's a checklist for bus transit agencies and another checklist for rail transit agencies and SSOAs. And both of those have been updated to incorporate the new bipartisan infrastructure law requirements. Andy, it looks like the mailbag is empty, at least for now.
We encourage everyone to submit any remaining PTASP questions directly to the PTASP Technical Assistance Center. And as Stuart just mentioned, the TAC continues to operate its help desk for the purpose of assisting the transit industry with answering PTASP-related questions. So that's going to include questions about developing your ASP, about implementing your ASP, and questions related to oversight. Also keep in mind that the PTASP TAC help desk is available by phone if you want to speak with a human. And you can reach the PTASP TAC help desk at 1-877-827-7243. And that would be between the hours of 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. You can also, of course, reach the PTASP TAC via email at ptasp-tac@dot.gov.
We also encourage you to visit the PTASP TAC resource library at transit.dot.gov/PTASP-TAC for more webinars, tools, fact sheets, and resources related to ASP development and SMS implementation, including those recently published ASP checklists for bus transit agencies and for rail transit agencies and SSOAs. And those checklists both incorporate the bipartisan infrastructure law requirements. And again, the library can be found at transit.dot.gov/PTASP-TAC. And finally, we want to encourage everybody to complete the survey that will appear in a moment. These surveys help us continue to refine and develop our technical assistance offerings and provide resources that are tailored to your needs. And with that, we thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.